Today's episode was recorded in front of a live audience inside Oxford University's Museum of Natural History in Oxford, England on August 8, 2024. Sing for Science is supported in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one with Arlo Guthrie, on which he talks about his song Alice's Restaurant with a nutritional anthropologist. Don't forget to click subscribe and give us a review. Thanks for listening. This is Sing for Science Labs. I'm your host, Matt White. Each episode in this series brings together an artist and scholar to explore one topic of shared interest. Today's topic is ecofeminism, and our guests are folk music icon Peggy Seeger and Oxford University biology professor Tim Coulson. Peggy Seeger is a leading architect of the folk music revival of the 50s and 60s, who along with her partner Ewan McCall helped shape the movement by blending traditional folk elements with contemporary social and political themes. Peggy was born into the esteemed American Seeger family in 1935, and much like her father Charles and brother Pete, she was subjected to blacklisting during the McCarthy era for her views. Peggy's 8-decade career has been steeped in feminist activism, and as such, she has used her music to champion social justice and environmental causes throughout her career. Professor Tim Coulson is a pioneer in the fields of population biology and evolutionary ecology. As joint head of Oxford University's biology department, Tim has become well known for his work on the dynamics of natural populations, integrating empirical data with mathematical models to better understand how environmental change impacts biodiversity. Tim's latest book is called The Universal History of Us, a 13.8 billion year tale from the Big Bang to you. In summary, it has been described as a complete, uncomplicated guide to the science of life, the universe, and everything. Our topic today, ecofeminism, can be defined as a branch of feminism and political ecology that explores the connections between women and nature. The theory argues that the oppression of women and the degradation of our natural environment are linked and caused by patriarchal capitalist systems. Further, ecofeminist theory calls for an egalitarian, collaborative society in which there is no one dominant group. Museum of Natural History, please help me welcome to the stage the already seated Peggy Seeger and Tim Coulson. So Peggy, it has been such a tremendous joy to read your memoir. One thing that I noticed is throughout, there are many instances where as an aside, you will say, I wasn't a feminist yet, in response to various sexist circumstances. So I was hoping you could pinpoint a time when you did begin identifying as a feminist.
Right. Well, I wasn't a feminist then. It was a kind of apology for some of the things that I was singing in the way of American folk music, because so many of them were misogynist, they were violent against women, they showed women's position in the societies that the songs came from, the folk songs. And it's important to note that folk songs generally were generated by working class people. They weren't made by bankers and generally by small shop holders and things. They were people who had no other kind of music. And this was before radio. The songs were made to be orally transmitted, oral and oral. So they were very easy to sing. They were very like speaking, and people remembered them because they were so like speech. And I'm talking about Anglo-American because that's all I do. So I wasn't a feminist by singing a certain number of the songs. And people would say after I sang Tom Dula or after I sang Poor Ellen Smith or Omi Wise, they says, why do you sing about these women who've been murdered by their lovers? And I sing them as a role of honor. that they must be remembered. Their names must be remembered. And the likelihood of a woman now being killed by her lover or by somebody she knows is enormous. So how would I not sing songs about how this is a tradition in capitalism, well, maybe not capitalism, maybe it's patriarchy. Capitalism came a little bit later, but they were, I mean, I'm speechless when I think of the number of women that have died violently at the hands of men that they knew. So that's one of the reasons I sing those songs, and I don't think I'm answering the question that you asked.
Is there a time when you started identifying as a feminist?
I knew there was a push point. Yes, it would most likely have been in 1968 or early 1969 when I was downstairs doing the accounts. And Ewan McCall was upstairs writing the script for our yearly production of the Festival of Fools. And you have to read the book to know what that is. And I'll keep saying that, you have to read the book, because there's so many backgrounds. So he came downstairs, he said, "Peggy, this is the year of the women. I want you to write a song about women." I'm doing the accounts. And anyway, I didn't even know it was Year of the Women. That's the kind of feminist that I was at the time, wasn't at the time. So I laid the accounts aside and I wrote, "I'm going to be an engineer in 2 hours." It's got more words than the Bible. And it's hard to remember. It's a slightly complicated harmonic system. And the thing is, it's called "I'm going to be an engineer," but it opens with, "When I was a girl, I wished I was a boy." Well, I didn't. I was very glad I was a girl. And then it says, "I'm going to be an engineer." Well, I never wanted to be an engineer. So I don't know where this song came from. But everybody latched onto it. And I would say that's the beginning of understanding feminism, because I was asked by a feminist group to come and sing it. So I'd sing this fabulous song about a woman who finally becomes an engineer after being told by all of these male organizations and economic things that you're not allowed to do that. So when I finished singing that, they'd say, "Now sing us another one." So I had a song about poor Ellen Smith, who was murdered by her lover. And I had Only Wise, who was, you know. So I started writing songs about different aspects. And I did what I called a soft feminist album called "Penelope Isn't Waiting Anymore." After Ulysses, Penelope wasn't there. Okay. Then the next one was called, I think, "Different, Therefore Equal," where I just chose different aspects of the feminist issues that were being discussed. And I wrote a song about each of them in a different style, because I don't have a style. I just write what I feel like I want to write. So that's one of the basic reasons why I'm a clever songwriter, but I don't have a style, and I haven't been taken up. But that's on purpose. I like it. Yeah. So I was constantly reminded. So that's why throughout the book, I say I did this because I wasn't a feminist then. You become it gradually. Wasn't plummeted into understanding it.
And that was one of those instances, I'm glad you mentioned it. I think when you debuted that song live, you describe it as being sung by 5 women in miniskirts. Is that right?
Oh.
You said I wasn't a feminist yet.
Yes. No, I wasn't a feminist then.
Then.
Yeah. It was the show that we were giving was in a large pub near King's Cross, and it had 3 stages, and I was one of the actors, and I'm a terrible actor, so they put me to singing and stage managing. So this song, we sang it, and there were 5 of us in a kind of a V. There were no microphones, and we were in very short, what they call pussy pelmets. You know, anybody here who doesn't know what a pelmet is? Yeah. So they were very short skirts. We have a photograph of it, and boy, did we look good. And we sang it all the way through.
Yeah.
Everybody together.
And so this is actually where there's a great instance of crossover, where we can speak about
What, my miniskirt?
Yes. In particular, the role that education can fill in combating sexism.
Well, actually, before we come on to that, when did you get interested in the environmental issues? So was that around the same time you became a feminist?
No,
or was that before?
no. That would be in the early, probably when Greenham Commons started, and I began meeting a lot of other feminists who, and you know, Greenham Common, the bombs, and the real realization of where the patriarchy and the capitalism came together was that these were soldiers in there with their families, some of them, and we were all women at Greenham Common, sitting around some of you were probably there. So I keep forgetting the question.
When did you get into, but I think you've answered it, around Greenham Common was when you got interested in the environment.
And I was meeting a lot of other women, and they were something, I'll tell you, they really were. It was an incredible way that they organized themselves. There were no committees with moot point and let's take a vote, comrades, and all of this with the unions that I used to be part of with you and McCall, and which were everybody battling to be the leader. Nobody was battling to be a leader. There were no leaders at Greenham Common. Everybody spoke for themselves, which was extraordinary in my memory. So I learned an awful lot from them about the theory and the practice of feminism and what we were trying to do, that nuclear bombs were against nature. We had no right to do what we were doing. You know, and then I got into lecturing against nuclear power and as well as nuclear bombs.
And now I've forgotten the question you asked me, Matt.
Well, I'm glad, because I think this is a good point to bring up something that I really enjoyed stumbling upon in your book, which is that there's substantial anthropological evidence for egalitarian societies from a very, very long time ago. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so most of the societies, obviously, we live in today, as kind of Peggy's alluded to, you know, are not particularly egalitarian, both in terms of the sexes, but also in terms of wealth distribution within and between countries. But the very first large settlement was a town called Kutalhoyuk in the sort of Turkey-Iran region. And it's quite an amazing, I've not been there, but I've seen many pictures about it and read about it in depth. And it looks like all the evidence suggests very strongly it was an incredibly egalitarian society. There were no large houses. All the houses were exactly the same size and exactly the same
So
shape.
there was no wealth and no money and no this lot is above that lot. And
There was clearly, I mean, people were coming there for a reason, and many trinkets have been found and bits of jewelry have been found. But what some of the arguments are at the moment about that place is it was the kind of dominant religion was an Amonist religion, and so there weren't hierarchies. But then, not long later, other towns started to form, including places like in Mesopotamia, and they have large religious settlements and large religious buildings, and it appears that that's where a lot of the initial sort of hierarchies started to form.
what's an Amonist?
So spirits, basically, all objects would have spirits, so animals, trees, even rocks and what have you.
How do you describe an egalitarian society? Were the men doing the cooking and taking care of the kids?
We don't know. I mean, we don't know. Certainly, if you look at hunter-gatherer societies now, there is definitely division of labor where women will still be collecting most of the food, most of the berries, whilst the men will go off and hunt for higher value items. Most of the evidence we've got from hunter-gatherers now and information that had people before is that men and women have often had different roles in terms of hunting and collecting food. In terms of cooking, we don't know. I mean, evidence of cooking goes back a very long time as well, but we don't know what sex roles have probably existed in humans. Sex differences and therefore sex roles have probably existed in humans for a very long time. And there are certainly sex differences in behaviors in our closest relatives, so things like bonobos and chimpanzees. Mm-hmm. But I think it was quite interesting that it appears that over time, we have had more egalitarian societies than we have now, and we've probably had even more hierarchical ones that we've got now. I mean, humans are very flexible in terms of the societies that they can form.
So from an evolutionary biologist perspective, I'd be curious to know, how would you study the way that things have, let's say, devolved in a way from egalitarian societies to a way that things have become so starkly imbalanced and patriarchal?
So in pretty much any organism that you look at, there's competition. And so the competition is either to avoid being eaten by a predator in some species, believe it or not, or it's competition for resources. And those resources often include food, they might include shelter, and eventually they come down to sort of controlling power once you end up with societies forming. And it does seem that it's something that has evolved in many different civilizations and many different cultures, sometimes in very different ways. But once competition for resources comes in, and some people appear to be better at gaining those resources, then you end up with these hierarchies very frequently emerging. And how's it studied? It's studied by looking at, say, distributions of, if you find burial sites, and you can find some individuals that have been buried with very large amounts of wealth, others that have sort of been buried, in much shallower graves with no objects and what have you. That's a really good sign, a good demonstration that there's hierarchies within a society. But also looking at the sizes of different buildings in places and how those buildings are set up. So that's how people do it. When we look at animal populations and we look at competition for resources, we can attach trackers to animals, we can monitor their behavior, we can even measure aspects of their energetics. So we can see how some individuals succeed in securing territories, others secure in lions, for example. Male lions will end up having tenure of a pride, normally for a relatively short period before they're killed by other lions that take over, that then kill the children of the lionesses and then mate with them to bring them back in. So although humans are pretty bad, we're probably not as bad as some species. I mean, just to give you another example, a flip side, but where the women are in control, spiders. So female spiders are often much larger than male spiders, and in many species, the male spider is eaten shortly after sex. So going out with a bang, I guess.
Like it's put out to pasture. Yes. So, sorry, go ahead, Peggy.
I was just going to ask, at what point did it begin to move over to a definite patriarchy? Was it when men realized that women didn't just conceive without them? When did humanity discover that she couldn't have a baby without him?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it will be pretty early in our history, I'm fairly certain. So, but I don't know. I can't give you an exact date, I'm afraid. So one of the reasons that, from a sort of ecological perspective, that humans have been so successful is our population has managed to continue to grow from very many generations, one after the other. And that doesn't happen to most species because they end up reaching an equilibrium with their resources. So, and their population will stabilize at sort of a constant population size. What humans have been extremely good at is accessing more and more resources and generating our own resources through agriculture, and agriculture becoming more and more successful. And that's what's led to humanity reaching 8 billion people. And a consequence of that is we have degraded many of our natural ecosystems, and we've led to climate change as a consequence of this. The way that you stop the way that you stop population growth humanely, and I say that because obviously wars reduce population size, I'm not advocating for that. Limiting the number of children that couples can have, women can have, I'm not advocating that. But the way that you can effectively slow population growth and reverse it is through female education. And that's really very well demonstrated. So and many countries go through something called the demographic, most countries in the world now have gone something through the demographic transition. And so first of all, survival rates start to increase, particularly of the young. So access to healthcare, where young children, their survival rates start to increase, they're not dying from traditional childhood diseases. And then following on from improvements in healthcare, coupled to improvements in education, particularly female education, you then start to see a decline in birth rates. And of course, the reason that birth rates decline is access to contraception and birth control.
And Peggy, you make a donation, or there's some point in the book that you talk about making a donation to education to women in developing countries. Is that right?
It's a group called Women for Women International. And what you do is you send a certain amount every month to this organization, and they take a bit off for administration, and then the rest goes to a woman who is trying to escape an economic position or from a violent husband, or who has a lot of children and she doesn't have enough income. And it goes towards her education. She learns to read, she learns to work with numbers so she can, and with some of them, all they want to do, these women, they want to get out of a violent marriage, or they want to have enough money to start a little cart where they can sell drinks in the street. And it's something like £22 a month is what I pay, but I have 2 of them. And these are women in Afghanistan, women in Sudan, women in Yemen, and they don't have to write to you, but they often do, telling you how many children they have and what their husband does. You don't try to contact them personally. You wait till they want to contact you. And some of the letters that you get saying thank you for this, and for me, £22 a month, I'm not going to say it's peanuts, but it's certainly what my little amount twice every month does for a woman who is literally at her wit's end of how to feed her children or how to get out of this relationship is extraordinary. It really is. Many of us give a certain amount to this, and this. But to me, educating women in countries where, one of the women who wrote to me recently, she's got 11 children. And it means that they can read, they can learn about birth control if they do that, but at least they can read and they can work with numbers so that they can work with money and make some money on their own. That, I find, is about the most wonderful thing that can be done now.
I also want to point out in your book that I appreciate how candid you are about your experience having children, also having abortions, and my understanding from a friend who runs a reproductive rights organization in the Southwest is that it's extremely important to call it that. Not reproductive rights as I just did, but abortion. Well,
about 5 or 10 years ago, there was a tremendous movement by people who are in the public eye, and I'm kind of in the public eye, women in the public eye, to come out and say, yes, I had an abortion, definitely, and to admit that this was, for whatever reason, because, having a child is not having a baby. Most women don't say, oh, I would like a teenager. They say, I want a baby, but to make them realize what having a child is, what it does to our lives. It's not just 20 years until if you're lucky, they leave home, but it's your life of worrying about them, and they're there, and their children are there. Once you're a mother, you are a mother forever. And this is something that's really important, and it has to be considered at the moment when you can actually tell your body, or your body tells you, no, I am not for this. And I wanted to choose all of my children. I didn't want a child by accident. And so that's why I had abortions. And I do admit it. And 3 of them were illegal. And 1 of them was with doctors who, 1 of them, they did it, but boy, did it give me hell. Yeah. There was a man, he
Yeah.
said, you wouldn't, and he was doing something very painful. And I was, and he was saying, you wouldn't do this if you'd gotten rid of your child. You wouldn't be hurting now if you hadn't gotten rid of your child. So those experiences I would not want anybody to go through. My first one when I was 26, and then right through my early 30s, during which I had children that I chose to have. 24 years old a mother, 28-year-old a mother, 38 years old a mother. 3 chosen children, my treasures.
Have either of you heard of this phrase, the 3 C's?
I haven't.
What does it relate to?
What we're talking about, it was something I actually stumbled upon that Pete had written about a song called The Pill that was continence, contraception, or chaos.
What's the first one?
Continence.
Continence,
Yeah.
contraception, or chaos.
Yeah. Because it's
That's
very...
Pete wrote that?
Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful. I've never heard that one. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it was he has a record called Dangerous Songs, and there was a liner notes on the back, and he was covering a song called The Pill. Mm-hmm. And he actually, I don't remember it, but there's some pretty simple math of what happens when we keep reproducing at this rate, which is chaos. Mm-hmm. Can you expand upon that at all?
Well, yeah, so as I said before, there's 8 billion people on the planet at the moment. The human population is now starting to slow because we've gone through the demographic transition. We've filled up pretty much all of the continents with the exception of Antarctica. Mm-hmm. So we haven't, so, I don't want to get too technical, but chaos is sort of actually a particular type of kind of mathematical pattern produced by certain equations. And we're not chaotic in that sense. So, but yeah, having the world's a pretty chaotic place at the moment, as I think many people, I think everyone is aware of.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, Peggy, what's interesting to me is we talk about this refrain that I picked up on in the book of this saying, I was not a feminist then. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is you have this extraordinary crystalline memory of all these early experiences in your family. And I can't help but wondering if it hadn't been impressed upon you at such a young age to stand up for the oppressed, from your father and your older brother.
I wasn't aware that I was standing up for the oppressed. I started hearing folk songs before I could even realize what they were. And the circumstances of that are explained in the book. I can't go into it now, but my mother was transcribing songs that had been collected by Alan and John Lomax, the collectors, from all over the south of the Mason-Dixon line, I would say. And they collected in prisons, in backwoods, in prairie towns, songs of the people, about the people's lives. And I was fascinated because I had enough to eat. I didn't have a husband who was killed by the gun thugs because he joined the Union. I was not in prison because I'd murdered my lover, but I remember songs about that, and I learned them as a child. And they were people who lived differently from me. I was not aware that they were oppressed. We didn't use that language because I lived in a town where all of the so-called menial workers, I don't know what menial actually means, it probably goes back to hand, I don't know, were black or brown. And I took that for granted. I had 4 mothers, 1 was white, and 3 were black who came to do work in our house because my mother taught piano 24/7, 8 hours a day, that kind of thing. So I wasn't aware that they were oppressed, but I knew that they lived in a certain part of town that my mother, when I was a teenager, said, don't go down there. So I went down there. And their whole lives were so different from mine, and they didn't talk about them much. And they were my mothers. They were tender and loving people.
One of whom was Elizabeth Cotton, is that right?
Yeah, the writer of Freight Train.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah. So I began to realize exactly what the oppression was when Ewan McCall came into my life. Mm-hmm. And boy, did he make me realize what it was. Mm. And his mother, who came to live with us for 16 years.
Yes.
Yeah. I was not oppressed. I probably would have been if we hadn't gotten away to tour. Mm. It was a small house.
And so, is there anything that you can do to expand upon your understanding of what ecofeminism is, especially when it first came on? Did it come on your radar when it was first coined in the 1970s?
No. They were separate things.
Okay.
And what I find extremely interesting was when I began to be interested in it was Greenham Common, talking to some of the women there. That was in the late 70s, early 80s, because my early feminist albums didn't mention ecology. They mentioned bombs and war and men and motherhood, but not the ecology. But what I began to realize was a different way of looking at it. When I got interested in it, I started talking to Ewan McCall about it. Now, he was a dyed-in-the-wool union man who loved big industry. He loved the unions. And he was not a warrior in any way. As a matter of fact, I think he was a physical, quote, coward, which I call a sensible person who, when somebody bigger than you comes at you with something bigger than you've got, you just say, okay, let's talk. That was Ewan McCall. So when I started getting interested in ecology, mainly through being against nuclear waste, because it went right through our town, Beckenham. The nuclear waste train went right through there every morning when my kids were on the platform. And I learned about nuclear power and nuclear waste. I learned about it quite a lot. And so I mentioned this to you, and it's time that we wrote some songs about what's happening to the planet. So each of us wrote a song about it, and the difference in the songs was incredible. He wrote a wonderful song called Nightmare, in which people are living underground. And it had a pounding rhythm. It's a wonderful song. And I wrote one called Wasteland Lullaby, which had 6 verses about how the child who is now living down below might be able to go up to play because it's a bit cooler today. A gentle song. And then there were songs about what we were doing to the world with war and with capitalism. And he wrote one called The Vandals, about people stealing land and people stealing this. And I wrote one, I think, about the economics of it. So the difference in the way we wrote about these things was extremely interesting. And he wasn't a macho man, but there were things in the house he would not do, My sons are not like that at all. They do anything in the house. They clean toilets, they change nappies, they cook, they make curtains, they do the whole thing. But not Ewan McCall. He was a bit macho, yes. So realizing the difference in these, I'm noticing what different people write. And I'm delighted when somebody like Ivor Cutler writes his song, Women of the World Take Over. You heard that one. It's one line. Women of the world take over now before it's too late. That's one line that goes the whole way through the song, and it just repeats it, and repeats it, and repeats it, and repeats it. So maybe, the sexes are beginning to have what is supposedly their stereotypical who they are crossing, especially now when there's so many things about white men being the ones who are doing the protests. And I was just saying to them, it must really suck to be a white man these days. you know.
And there's chromosomal evidence, perhaps, for what Peggy's talking about.
Well, I mean, I think culture can take very many different forms. I mean, it's certainly genetically men are larger than women on average, and and they're stronger than women on average, and a consequence of that means that, you know, and they have been able to, you know, dominate, and that's, you know, we now realize that that's wrong in the past. And I mean, I think one of the things that's really struck me, and one of the things that, you know, I've been working hard to as head of the biology department, is to increase diversity, because diversity within the department, both in terms of having more women there and fewer men, but also in terms of race and, you know, background, is really key, because the problem you have if you've just got one group of people who are dominating things is you end up with just kind of one opinion, and you need to get opinions right the way across the board. And so we've worked very hard to increase diversity, not just in my department, but across Oxford right the way. And I think we're starting to see dividends from that. And I think that, you know, there are clearly some white men out there at the moment who are protesting, who are struggling with the idea that their privilege is disappearing, or they feel their privilege is disappearing. That, you know, it's still pretty privileged to be a white male, I'm not going to lie.
How would you describe those dividends to those people? To the naysayers?
I mean, I think, I don't know, I think it's very difficult. I think when you're trying to communicate with someone who's feeling threatened and who's worried about their future and worried about their concerns, who possibly hasn't thought about these things very often, it can be very, very difficult to get through. Unfortunately, it takes generational change on many of these issues.
What about education?
Oh,
The boys generally don't take to the kind of schooling that we get as well as the girls do. So where do we go from there?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think it's certainly true that girls are now doing, on average, a little bit better at school, but we're also changing the way that we try and teach. A lot of the education, a lot of the culture comes from home life as well as school life, and so, you know, shifting cultures is slow, and it's hard, but I think we are making progress. But it doesn't happen overnight, and unfortunately, you know, there are some people that it's just always impossible to change their opinions, unfortunately. So it's a generational change that happens.
I'm sorry to linger on this, but I'm asking for my own edification. You mentioned the dividends from when we have a more inclusive and diverse society. And you being, you know, as being both a professor and administrator, how do you describe those dividends? How do you experience them?
So I think, you know, one of the things that I think we've found from having a more diverse society is we've really learned in our department, for example, particularly around Black Lives Matters, that many of the black students sort of said they would walk around Oxford and they would see statues. So a student said to me this, she was walking around, she was a black student from America, she was walking around Oxford and she went past a statue of a white guy who turned out to have connections to the slaving industry from, over a century ago, who had her surname. So her surname had come from that. And that was a really powerful statement that she made in a meeting about this. And I don't think any of us had really thought, I just walked past that statue and hadn't crossed my mind, right? But it had a real impact on her. And so I think having those conversations is a really useful way, and giving people voices from different backgrounds. Oxford used to be very public school as well. I didn't go to public school, I have to say. But I'm one of the, you know, when I arrived here and I looked at faculty, I was one of very few people on my faculty who hadn't gone to public schools, private education,
right, yes,
in the UK. Who hadn't gone through that. So I think the problem is they then thought, well, we better make him head of department. And, you know, but anyway, that's another thing. So I think the dividends come from diversity is because you hear different stories and you hear different backgrounds. And I think that's one of the great things that Peggy was saying, you know, about folk music. You're telling stories, a range of stories from many different backgrounds. So I think that's where there's potentially quite a lot of crossover.
So perhaps before we go to the Q&A, if you don't have more questions, we could sing a couple of these songs. Is that okay, Peggy? Okay.
Am I in tune? I'm notoriously not a tuner. I got involved in the what I consider the overpopulation thing because apparently this world would be perfect for about 2 billion humans the way we consume things now. And that is a terrifying statistic if it's true. So I decided to write a song. Some of my songs are almost like trying to set out the whole scenario all in one song, which is probably why, never mind. Baby, welcome, if you're already here. Pretty little baby, welcome if you're coming soon. Pretty babies, if you're far, far away, think about waiting a while, 'cause here there's not much room. To Susan and Jimmy, a daughter, to Mary and Michael, a son, to the earth, a flood of consumers who feed on her body, her blood, and her bones. A treasure is here for the taking. Humans are clearing the coffers from the low to the high. All of us buy whatever our culture can offer. Metal and cloth and rubber, leather and paper and wood, and each baby we have is sheltered and clad from the market that once was the world. Each baby will need food and water, a house, a job and a car, oil and gas and places to park when they don't want to stay where they are. Then more roads, more buildings, more cities, sewage, pollution and dirt, and each baby will make more babies that take and use up more and more of the world. 1 and 1 can make 3, 1 and 1 can make 4, but when 1 and 1 make 5, 6 and 7, the earth can't replenish or store. So from David and Annie a forest, from Peter and Penny a river, for every human that comes to the earth is a taker more than a giver. Baby, welcome, if you're already here. Pretty little baby, welcome if you're coming soon. Pretty babies, if you're far, far away, think about waiting a while, 'cause here there's not much room.
Thank you.
I tend to write songs that you, I don't know how much of it you grasp, because sometimes the songs are very clever, sometimes they're over clever, they're too clever. And when I discovered that when I was doing research on nuclear reactors, that one of the reasons that we have them is because we had to make plutonium for bombs. I look on them as quite dangerous. My partner has a very serious thyroid problem, and along with a whole slew of people her age, she was born in 1947, and in 57, wind scale blew, and a radioactive cloud went right over the north of this country. They had to throw away 50 million gallons of milk, and the cloud, radioactive cloud, drifted right across Northern Ireland. And my partner is from Belfast. And a stack of her and her people, women of the same age as she have enormous thyroid problems. I think that's one of the problems with the way patriarchy and capitalism work, is that we, as a race, we invent science and we don't see what's going to happen to it. We think, oh, this is clever, let's do it, without thinking of how it can be used and how it can be a subject for somebody like Musk or whoever, Altman, or what they want to do with it can sometimes go way over to something else. So nuclear power, I don't trust it. I really don't. Now I need to have that. So when I was with the nuclear group, the group, I wrote this one. And it's a little bit high for where I'm. No, I mean the pitch.
I think someone needs to get a photo of us in bed before they go.
Yeah, it's a long time. It's a long time since I've had a man kneeling at my feet. Yeah, it was about 10 years ago. If you want the bomb, one of your very ownium, not the ordinary kind, but one made of plutonium, you got to have a place, a kind of power station. It's the only place plutonium's made. If you want the bomb, build a station that is nuclear. Johnny Doe will foot the bill. The cost is quite spectacular. When atoms work for peace, electricity bills increase. But it's the only way plutonium's made. If you want the bomb, turn your lights on with uranium. How to explain away the cost is straining many a cranium. Shut down the plants that toil on gas and coal and oil, then you'll have to get plutonium made. If you want the bomb, say goodbye to civil liberties. Atoms ain't compatible with freedom and democracy, 'cause unions and the like are apt to go on strike just when you want to get plutonium made. If you want the bomb, don't expect to have the niceties. Hospitals and schools and things and people's paradise cities. Kick justice up the ass, put freedom out to grass, but at least you'll get plutonium made. On the other hand, if we really get the bomb, we won't need no amenities. Health care for corpses is somewhat of an obscenity. So our leaders may be right, cutting everything in sight, except the way plutonium's made. And to me, don't clap at this point, please. To me, the important point is to see how the sciences, the social sciences of having all the things we can't have because we've spent so much on nuclear power and all of this, how they conflate with other features. I mean, for instance, social sciences is a science. What happens when you have something like Sellafield right next door to you, and you have radioactive dust in your house, and that's where your job is. So you can't afford to move, and you can't afford to sell your house because they proved that there's... And so doing something like that, you really have to think when you're listening to it, and part of it is clever words. So how would you use a song like that? I wrote it because I wanted to, because when we were going lecturing on nuclear power in schools and women's groups, I would sing that, and they'd laugh like hell. But yes, so that's the other song you wanted.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make a quick defense of science there, briefly, if I may. So I think what science does is allows us to find out facts about the world. And in fact, that's what my book that's just out explains. Don't
the facts come first?
Well, it tells us about what we've discovered. Yeah, but science is a way of finding out facts. And so the scientific method is how you find out facts and how we use that to understand how we came to exist and why the universe exists. Science can be used, or the findings from science can then be used by people for good or for bad. So we wouldn't have the modern world and the positives of the modern world, medicine and what have you, without science. But science can also be used in a very bad way to produce weapons of mass destruction that can kill large
Why
numbers
don't
of
we
people.
know the difference between what can be used in a bad way? I mean, I read The Guardian, and in this last week, there was an article about this fusion reactor that they're wanting to make that is going to cost billions and billions and billions. And we have starving people, and we can have wind and wave power. And we can, let's lace up all the gyms where everybody is on those things. We'll lace those up to some kind of power. There's all kinds of ways we could create the power we need and lower the actual living style of our incredibly stupid societies. So, but science wants a fusion reactor. And
Well, no, I would say it's not science that wants a fusion reactor, it's the politicians that are doing it. Science tells you how you can generate nuclear fusion, and the positives of nuclear fusion. It's going to be expensive. I'm not saying we should do it or we shouldn't do it. I don't think scientists should be making those decisions. It's up to politicians. But what nuclear fusion does is it's able to fuse together atomic nuclei of lighter elements to form heavier elements, and it doesn't create the nuclear waste that nuclear fission does. Sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. But that nuclear fission does, that's right. So nuclear fusion is a very clean fuel. We can't do it yet. It's the fuel, it's the heat. The sun works by nuclear fusion, essentially. But, I mean, going back to your point, so drones, for example, can be used to plant seeds and to plant trees into areas that we can't get to help reforest areas, so be used for a positive thing, but they can also be used to kill people remotely. Lasers can be used in medical research, in medicine to improve vision by removing cataracts and what have you, yet they can also be used to kill. And it's not science's fault, it's the people who use science.
music can be dangerous too. Remember the Horst Wessel song in the Second World War that encouraged millions of Germans to sign up to the German army and
What was it called?
Horst Wessel, Horst Wessel. It was a song about a German who was killed. I've forgotten the exact terminology, but it was taken up by all the Nazis, and that was their marching song, the Horst Wessel song.
Okay. Well, at this point, this would be a good time to
Thank you for the argument.
go for a quick Q&A. Do any of you have questions for either Peggy or Tim? Sure. I'll bring... I don't know if you had Phil Donahue over here in the 80s, but that's what I'm going to do with the microphone.
You're going to take the whole thing away?
Yeah, Tim, could you hand Peggy that one? Okay, here.
I'm a Gemini, so...
My question is regarding one of my favorite, Peggy Seeger, one of my favorite songs of yours, but the question is to Tim. And it's about, the song is called Invisible Woman. I think I've got that title right. One of your songs that you've written not so long ago, I think. And Tim, my question is, Peggy sings about the invisible woman, the woman at a certain time in her life, who, I think I'm right in describing it as the woman becomes discarded by society and becomes invisible by society because she's past, in society's terms, her worth or her use. Was there a time in anthropological terms when that wasn't the case? Is that a modern phenomenon, or can we say that when people reach a certain age, they had a productive and a social value in the past where that didn't come to an end, if you like?
So one of the really unusual things about humans and about women is the menopause. So very, very few animal species, possibly killer whales and humans, we don't really know about killer whales, have menopause. And so there's a big discussion and quite a lot of research trying to understand why that's the case. And there are various arguments there. Lots of it's about cultural knowledge, so being able to pass knowledge down to younger generations. Some of it's about helping to be able to look after grandchildren and raise grandchildren. And so there's actually very good evidence that children who are born, whose grandmothers are alive and whose grandmothers help raising the young and help their daughters look after their young, or their sons look after their children, have perform better, have higher survival rates, have higher do better in terms of learning and what have you. I mean, they still need access to education or what have you. So no, there's a lot of very compelling research that shows that menopause may actually be evolutionarily adaptive, believe it or not. So.
I should say that song was kind of broached by my son, who was 64 when he came up to write a song with me. We didn't know what we were going to write about. Stretched himself out on the sofa, and I said, "Where are you in your life, Neil? What's happening?" He says, "I'm beginning to feel invisible at my age." Well, he's lost most of his hair.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, I've lost a lot of mine, and it turned out that what he felt invisible to was younger women. So, but I said, "Try being a woman of 80." So that's, 85 I was at the time. So we wrote that song together, my son and I. So men can feel invisible too. Yeah, definitely. And it has been taken up by a lot of older women. But I will say that I am very pleased to be invisible to a lot of certain people. I really am, yeah. You are, and we watch you, and you don't even know that we're watching.
More questions from the audience?
Hi, that was wonderful, and that was a really wonderful performance. So special thanks for that. I was kind of curious on both and anyone's opinion on this about the role of, I guess, science as a general concept, but more specifically of scientists and the scientific community in being a part of social movements like, feminism and, stopping certain unequal political and social structures. And I'm curious on your thoughts on what role science and the scientific community can take in very human problems that have been going on for a long time, and what role science fits in all of that.
So my view is that the scientific method is how we find out facts about the world, and what scientists are trying to do, nearly every scientist I know, is they're trying to understand some aspect of the natural world. They want to understand how the physical world works or how nature works. I'm interested in, I'm a biologist, so I'm interested in how ecosystems function and how they fit together. That's what science's power is. In terms of how science is used and how money is invested into science, that has to be a decision for society as a whole. You don't want to put scientists in charge of everything. They have a role to play. The modern world is built on progress in the sciences. But as I said before, there are other issues there. Scientists should provide advice if they're asked for the advice in terms of how they think things work and what can be done. But what scientists, and if they want to go into politics, they shouldn't be stopped. But actually, the way that science is used should be a decision for society as a whole. It becomes very dangerous if you have... Science is very powerful, and scientists can provide advice, but it doesn't mean every decision we make should be based on what science says, because there's a lot of other drivers in terms of how we make policy and how we decide what should be done. That's my view.
I feel that scientists should have a certain responsibility about what they do. And by way of example, was a person that we knew back in the 1960s, an absolutely incredible nerve specialist named Richard Hammerschlag. And he was with us when we were doing our drama work, and he was absolutely incredible. And he came over for coffee down in Beckenham where we lived. And he said, "I'm in a real quandary." He said, "My position," I think he was with a really high university. He says, I've discovered something about the linking between different sections of nerves as they move from the brain down to whatever it is they're controlling. And I've discovered a way where we can interrupt that and put a new message in. And he says, I can see how that could be used in changing what a person says or does. And he said, I don't want to tell anybody about this. I don't want it to be, somebody else will find it in 8 or 10 years, or maybe sooner than that, but I don't want to be responsible for something that could be used for torture, for making a person do what they don't want to do. And he left his position, and he went to be a doctor and a surgeon in a Native American reservation in America. He just decided he wasn't going to do something that could be so deadly. And I think the responsibility of science, I mean, musicians have responsibility too. You know, we can probably whip you up to do things that you probably wouldn't do, or think they can join us together in things that we should do and things that we shouldn't. They help with marching if you're on a march, but also here we go, here we go, here we go. It's possible to use anything. And being a responsible person, and I've tried to be a responsible musician in my life, and to study more than what the music already has told me, to be a different kind of musician. So whatever we do, we're artists and scientists, because music is partly science. The actual sound, I mean, sound is part of the way we operate, and music depends on, I mean, if I was to sing a quarter tone flat, you'd soon know it. Yeah.
I completely agree that science, everyone has responsibilities, and yeah, we shouldn't be developing or trying to use science to develop things for torture or what have you. And yeah, of course, there's a responsibility. I completely agree. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not arguing against that.
We were very fortunate to travel through Africa in our own vehicle, and we were going through Zambia and stopped the night at a camp. And the following day, we were going to give a lift to Jaguar. And he was his father was a tribal chief, and he had 3 wives, and they had 23 children in total.
You gave them all a lift?
Yeah, and he said he was going up to see his wife and his 2 children, and the most important thing to them was education. And it wasn't the number of children. And just another one illustrating the change that there is in Africa, which is, it's not total, but it's there, was in the Maasai tribes. A lot of the women don't tell their husbands, but they go on the pill after the first one and then have a gap of, say, 3 or 4 years. And then, they'll satisfy him again, because they're very male-orientated. The whole thing is, even in those tribes, the birth rate is going down.
Absolutely. It's a demographic transition, yeah.
What happens if the husband finds out she's been on the pill? Where does she get the pills? Yeah. My partner used to go to the border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland and throw packages of the pills over the wall. Yeah, not the wall, but over the border. Yeah.
Thank you so much to both the panelists. I guess science and music and art are all ways that we seek to gain greater access to the truth, and it seems like, Tim, you've spoken to the fact that science should take a more objective stance, or a more distant stance from the political implications of the truth that you may discover. And it seems that, Peggy, you've spoken to the political power of music and of science, and I guess this is a question mostly for Peggy. I'm wondering whether your pursuit of art has led you in a political direction that emerged, or that was inherent in your truth-seeking through your music, whether that was adopted based on your own political views, or whether you sort of developed both as an artist and as a political thinker in a more conjoined way, and if you felt that politics and art were as inseparable as they might be.
What is your definition of politics?
I suppose anything that has implications for our lives on a societal level.
I don't know, I like that one. Ewan McCall used to do, he said, politics is the science of human organization. And to be political, some people are political, but if you ask them, they think you're talking about party politics. And party politics can be very divisive. I don't know a whole lot about politics. I grab this bit of knowledge, that bit of knowledge, something from somewhere else. And sometimes I occasionally make a song, like I did with my abortion song called The Judge's Chair. The last verse could be read in two ways, and I didn't realize that until my son pointed that out, that it could be read as for abortion or against abortion. So I just sliced the verse out and said, thanks. Yeah. So to me, politics is the way we all get on. And what I try to do now is to relate one idea with another, so that we don't just, it's one of the problems I think about our education, is that we focus on just this discipline, or just that discipline, or just the other, whereas they cross, as you've pointed out, they cross with each other. So in some of the songs that I do, like the one I made called The Progress Train, which it relates progress and development to rape, because it's pushed on us. We don't want it necessarily. Some of it is good, not that there's anything good about rape, but the act of rape, it is a physical act which can be like this, like this, like this, like this, and then it gets too much. And it's the same with progress and development. It can be good, 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 and then it goes bad. So a song that relates those two, I'm trying to do that. That's one way. And writing songs that maybe make you think in a different way. One of my wedge songs on my most recent album, which was called First Farewell, is a song called Lubrication. And when you say this song's about lubrication, immediately there's a loud or a very soft snigger who's listening. And you guys were very quiet. Are you still with me? And so the first verse is about just what you think it is. And the second verse is about tectonic plates, which need the lubrication of oil and water and gas. And we're taking it away, and the tectonic plates are scraping together, and it's very uncomfortable. And the whole song is called Lubrication. So getting into people's heads, if you started saying, this is a song about tectonic plates, you would shut off, most likely, if you had any sense, songs about tectonic plates.
I wouldn't.
No, you. Hey, do you want to tell us something else? and so you wedge in with something that you know people will listen to. So another song that I made wedges you in as being an anti-war song, and it ends up that we are declaring war on the earth, and it's got to stop. So if you said at the beginning that this is war against the earth, which is what we are declaring war against what we call nature, even though we're part of nature. No? So I'm trying to, some people think I'm too literal and too mental with it. That's okay. I'm not trying to be popular, and I never will be, and I'm thank God that I'm not. So writing songs that interest me, they interest me. And I might be a little better known when I snuff it, Might. But I don't care. I really don't. I just want to write good songs that say what I think and where we are now, which is a very hard place to be. And where a lot of us are hard rocks and hard places all by ourselves. That's a good song, huh?
Well, thank you both so much for participating in this episode. Please help me in thanking Peggy Seeger and Professor Tim Coulson. Be sure to check out Peggy's latest album, First Farewell, and her memoir, First Time Ever. For more information, please visit peggyseeger.com. Tim's book, The Universal History of Us, a 13.8 billion year tale from the Big Bang to you, is now available through Penguin Books and can be purchased wherever books are sold. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panorama. Social media manager is Bailey Constas. Digital producer is Keenan Cush. And location, camera, and sound was by Steve Pierce. Special thanks to Carrie Harvey Piper at Red Grape Music, Laura Ashby, Paris Grosvenor, Louis Lofthouse, and Ella McKelvey at the Natural History Museum, Xander Kensell at Caper Books Oxford, and everyone at the Store Hotel. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media at Sing for Science. Thanks for listening.